Okay, welcome everybody. I'll be admitting people for a short time before we get started.
Mi maestro.
Okay, yep. And I'll wait for my two colleagues to join us before we fully get started. Hopefully that should be fairly soon. Glad to see a good turnout so far. Yep, good morning, everybody. Okay. Okay, sorry for disappearing there. My colleagues needed me to send a Zoom meeting address, so I was doing so. Hello, that's why I have my Kindle's on next to me, so if I'm looking over on occasion, it might be to check email, or if somebody needs a copy of the Zoom meeting link. Okay. All right, still waiting, but okay. Oh. Okay, I saw someone with the hand up. If you have a question, you can put it into the chat. Oh, sorry. Too many places to look at once. Okay. All right. Well, one of my colleagues just joined in. Let's see, let me get rid of the chat screen momentarily. Hi, Liana. Let me unmute you.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. Okay.
So
All
this
right.
time maybe it will go more smoothly than last
Yeah,
time.
well, this time we actually have the microphone working right off the bat, which is a nice, which is a good step in the right direction.
I have a little PowerPoint with a few images. Do you think I will be able to share it at some point?
Well, last time we tried doing a PowerPoint with the sharing, it didn't kind of came off rather ridiculous.
Let's see. I mean, I'll try to see what happens this time, but hold on.
Well, if I activate the share screen, the amount of space the recording takes for the Zoom meeting goes up exponentially. Because the last time we did a share screen with The Walking Dead, the file ended up being almost 2 gigabytes.
Oh, okay.
So that was that takes up a lot of memory on the Zoom, and it's harder for me to download.
Okay, I guess it's okay. I was wondering if I could put it on my phone, but it's okay. I'll just talk about it. I thought it would be fun to show the images, but I'll just talk about
that should
characters
work.
without.
Yeah, it's kind of just if I had more time to experiment, I'd probably try it, or maybe before we'll work on that before we actually do a full-blown meeting, so I can figure out how to make it work more effectively. Okay. Okay. Looks like.
Let me just try one thing. I mean, would you mind if I put it on my phone and show it like
fine.
this?
That'll work. Yeah,
okay.
That'll work. Okay, so okay. All right, welcome to snap or not to snap. That is the question. As we look at Shakespearean elements within the movies of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And there actually are more ties than one might expect, other than one of the lines said in the first Avengers film when Iron Man first meets Thor and he says, "Hey, Shakespeare in the park, doth your mother know that she's used your drapes?" And of course, a lot of the actors in the MCU, such as Florence Pugh or Benedict Cumberbatch, have had Shakespearean training and background. One of the early directors of the MCU, the Kenneth Branagh, who directed the first Thor film, got his start in the Royal Shakespeare Company, and his first movies were all adaptations of Shakespeare. But we'll be talking, it'll be more than just simply the actors. It's the way the elements and story elements and the tone of the MCU is also reflective of the works of Shakespeare, and some of the themes and how some of the characters' stories bear similarities to it. One of the and of course, then we'll talk about some of the differences, because obviously being from two very different times, there are certain things that, a play can accomplish, and there's certain things that are much more feasible now in terms of what can be shown due to special effects and all of that. But let me go ahead and I'll let Liana kick this off with her presentation, and we'll use that as a way to dive into things. So Liana, the floor is yours.
I was still trying to open it on my phone, but it's hard to send the attachment to myself because it's big, so it's taking a while.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll just forget about showing images. I'll try one more time. Okay, hold on. Something happened.
Oh. Okay.
And Robin is gonna join us too,
Okay.
but he is not. I mean, I did this independently and.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Okay. Okay. I'll
just one minute.
while
It's here.
Liana's getting everything up and working, let me give some examples. So of at least one very famous Shakespeare play that had at least a couple of different parallels. This is where you can talk about characters that kind of have the same type of story. And that would, of course, be one of Shakespeare's most famous plays and prominent plays, which is Romeo and Juliet. The story of two star-crossed lovers who try to find romance between their two feuding families, and of course, it all ends up in disaster, as they both end up dying, and it's through a misunderstanding. Now, to me, one of the clearest parallels in terms of star-crossed lovers would be obviously Wanda and Vision from the Avengers films, and then the WandaVision TV series. Certainly, they don't come from a feuding family's background, but in the sense that they have a lot of challenges to overcome to be together, such as of course, the most obvious challenge is the fact that Wanda is human and Vision is an android. So that makes for an interesting relationship right there. The heck with feuding families, you've got, there's the,
And just showing it to see if it is
yeah,
it big
I can
enough
see
to
it.
see what.
Yeah, the edges of the words are off the screen, but still.
Yeah, but it doesn't have a lot of text, so it's mostly for the images that I wanted to.
Oh, okay.
To show.
Okay, so.
So I guess I only have like 6 slides anyway, so it's just a little bit of visual.
Okay. Okay.
So you can finish your thought.
Yeah, let me carry through with the Wanda
let me
and
just
Vision.
see what Robin is doing.
Okay.
And I'll be
we have, of course, the whole idea that Wanda, of course, is human, Vision is an android. Now, of course, given that Wanda controls chaos magic, who knows what might be possible. Of course, in a sense, they do have, shall we say, a little bit of a star-crossed romance and end up, not on different sides, but when Captain America Civil War takes place, you have this, hi, Robin, let me, okay, hopefully you can, go ahead and unmute yourself, Robin. I sent that, I think I sent the, okay, got it.
Hi.
Hi.
Good to see you, David.
Okay, so the events of Captain America Civil War definitely put a wrinkle in their relationship, in the sense that their ability to spend time together becomes more and more of a challenge. Having to work around the split of the Avengers, and some of them being wanted individuals on the run for not signing up for the Sokovia Accords. And of course, just as they really try to make a start of it, and Vision's made his choice to stay with her, then we hit Avengers Infinity War. And, that, really kicks the tragic aspect of this romance into high gear. As of course, part of what makes Vision capable of love and falling in love, of course, is mind stone that he has, and the unusual combination of all these different parts of the Jarvis program that Tony Stark set up, the Ultron program. Plus, you throw in a huge dose of Asgardian magic in Avengers: Age of Ultron when Thor comes in and hits the chamber that's birthing Vision with thunder and lightning from Asgard, which again, that's a big X factor too. And and of course, with Vision needs that mind gem to exist. And of course, unfortunately here, this is the person coming after them is not two feuding families. This is Thanos, an all-powerful being with almost, literally with godlike power. And, they face a difficult choice, but, even though it means giving up on romance, Vision is willing to sacrifice his life to try to stop Thanos. And Wanda is willing to be the agent of that death quite deliberately. In Romeo and Juliet, it's all a case of mistaken assumptions that leads to their death. But one of the interesting, of course, twists on Wanda and Vision, of course, is Wanda is willing to sacrifice a potential of having a great and loving relationship, which is something which is not easy for her, to save the world and the universe. And she's willing to make that sacrifice. Of course, even though she does make that sacrifice, it ends up not completely stopping Thanos, who simply turns back time. And of course, we find out later in an event, and so Vision dies once again, this time perhaps permanently. And we find out in Avengers Endgame at the end that despite most of the other Avengers being back or brought back when the Avengers undo the snap, of course, Vision and Black Widow were not among those because, because Vision wasn't wiped out with the snap, he can't actually be brought back by it. He was already dead when the snap took place. So in Romeo and Juliet ends, of course, with the deaths of both Romeo and Juliet and the sadness that creates. One of the unique things that Shakespeare did not do in his day, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe is able to, is that we're able to continue with Wanda and also Vision's story after the end of their tragedy. Shakespeare never wrote sequels, and that's okay. Maybe once with the Henry VI 1 through parts 1 through 3.
The history plays.
Yeah, the history plays. Yeah, the less said about Henry VI, the better. That's not one of his some of his best work. Or Henry IV, part 1 and 2. Okay, so yeah, he did have some series. Yeah. But in terms of like his major tragedies, of course, it would have been tough to kind of have sequels to a lot of his major tragedies like Macbeth or King Lear or Hamlet, because Romeo and Juliet, because pretty much everybody's dead at the end, or the main characters are dead at the end. So, but because not everybody dies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we get a chance to explore what happens after. Now, of course, both Wanda and Vision don't die. Wanda comes back. But for her, it's been 5 years. And so the TV series WandaVision really explores the effects of that loss. And, most often magic in Shakespeare turns up in his comedies. magic is present in Shakespeare, but for the most part in the tragedies, pretty much the only time magic really has a huge role is in Macbeth. But in a number
Also, there's
of,
magic in the problem plays, right? Like The Tempest, for example. Right? Which is
okay, yeah, I was thinking more
between kind of like in between tragedy and comedy, right?
Yeah, that's not a tragedy per se. It's
it's so there's more magic in the comedy and problem plays, and by problem plays we don't mean plays that are really bad. Okay, just just want to make sure that
plays they didn't know how to categorize exactly.
Yeah. Kind of like archaeologists do if they don't know what something is at a ruined city. They say it has religious significance.
Right.
Or in medicine, my wife admitted that if you ever hear the term idiopathic, it means they don't know what it is.
Wow, okay.
So, I probably shouldn't have given state secrets away like that. But of course, the first several episodes of WandaVision are set up as comedy, with salutes to kind of the old American sitcoms of, the various different decades. And it does so, and it presents those very, very well. But of course, even as there's comic moments and Wanda's apparently reunited with Vision and even has children with them, the question is, how is all this happening? And of course, then as we get into the last 2 or 3 episodes, we have, once again, it turns fully to tragedy. And this is something we'll talk about later, is that one of the things that Shakespeare did very effectively in his greatest tragedies is to mix in some lighthearted moments and comic moments that actually increase the power of the tragedy. So, and that also happens with WandaVision as the, we begin, as the magic that Wanda used begins to unravel, it becomes even more tragic because Wanda's confronted by a choice. In order to create magic, this magic spell, there's a price to pay. And she has to decide, do I keep this world I've created and my children and everything, or do I let it go? And she makes the, unlike a lot of Shakespeare's tragic heroes who make a bad choice and then it's too late for them to reverse it without having serious consequences, like they end up dead, Wanda's able to reverse it. Yet, because it's still playing out, and in 2 weeks we'll be having Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, that could really also pick up on what's going on in Wanda's mind. Will she fully go to the dark side? As at the end of WandaVision, she's looking through, the Darkhold, which is basically the equivalent of the Book of the Damned, and that can't be good. But because these are interconnected movies, the MCU is able to explore areas that Shakespeare didn't have the opportunity to, of following up on the stories and continuing them, and see how these characters develop as they move through the various tragedies that might confront them. Okay, so Liana?
Oh, okay. Let me put it on the phone again.
Well, Liana's setting up. I just have a question. Okay. So David, do you think, or well, either of you, do you think that the WandaVision show is a good romantic, piece? I mean, to me,
no chemistry.
Yeah, I mean, there's like Romeo and Juliet is like one of the most classic romantic tales of all time. I feel like the Marvel movies, maybe superhero movies in general, don't do a very good job with romantic elements. I'm not saying that can't get better. I like some things about the WandaVision story. I like the notion that, she was willing to, right, alter reality to try to bring back her husband, right? That was very touching. but like I guess as a romantic piece of work, I mean, do you think it resonates? I mean, the romance didn't. The superhero story was awesome. I liked it, but like the romantic
I
part.
think one of the best romances is Wolverine and
Yeah.
Phoenix.
Well, I think it was the possibilities involved that if Vision had been able to live, would he have been able to start to show more emotion? Because that was part of the story.
Right.
He's moving from being an android to kind of having a soul and being more human until that got cut off.
Yeah.
And so when Wanda recreates him, it's kind of with what she remembers, but also kind of fills in the gaps with these with the material from she remembers from the sitcoms. So I always thought it was more of the. I think a lot of the superhero movies, they do more with the possibility of romances between the different characters rather than following them up and actually showing them. With maybe WandaVision. I mean, there was also, of course, Black Widow, Natasha and Bruce Banner. That was hinted at.
That didn't seem like it worked very well either for me.
Yeah, no, well, that got cut off and they never really picked up on that story as the Hulk left and ended up on, in Thor Ragnarok. And by the time we get back to Infinity War, it's just kind of acknowledged and that was it.
Yeah.
And then a lot of the full romances kind of take place off screen. Sure. Like Tony Stark and Pepper Potts, Captain America and Margaret Carter. They they were barely getting started, like Spider-Man and MJ in the Spider-Man, Tom Holland Spider-Man trilogy. That a lot of the romances take place off screen. But it's also, this one was kind of the most tragic, because one could argue that like Tony Stark and Pepper Potts and Captain America and Margaret Carter were able to, or was that Sharon Carter again? Yeah, never mind. We'll call it Agent Carter. Let's just keep it. Yeah. Okay. I mean, those took place off screen. We didn't see much of them, and they ended up married and at least for a time being together. The other big one would be like Spider-Man and MJ, where it didn't really get a chance to go fully flower by the time we hit the events of No Way Home. But yeah, I think the one that, it may not be romance in the traditional sense, but I knowing these characters, I looked at it as kind of the possibility existing of this very unusual relationship between an android who perhaps could become fully human. Because ironically, Ultron has very human emotions. But Vision, not so much. He starts to develop it. And of course, the psychological impact upon Wanda having survived it, perhaps in some ways symbolizing other people around the world who lost relationships or had things significantly change.
Yeah, I mean, the tragedy for me in WandaVision works better than the romance.
Yeah.
But I mean, and I like the way they set up, what's coming, right, in the new movie, the Doctor Strange movie, and things like that.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if Wanda goes to the dark side, is she able to come back from that? Mm-hmm. And of course, that's one of the things that we have with Shakespeare too, is that the way he portrays the characters as being very complex and very human. But we can pick up on that later.
Okay, I'll start with my little presentation, and then we can talk
yeah,
more
I
about.
I don't have a PowerPoint or anything, so I'll let Liana.
I'll just show some of the images that I have, but I'll talk first and then I'll show a few of the images. So I put together a few parallels, so you can talk more about the differences. Of course, I focused more on the ways that I see some of these movies in particular, because I'm more familiar with the movies than the comic books. And I noticed some trends in the movies and some tendencies to try to make them more complex. And that always the fallback for any movie to make something more complex. Like if you look at shows too, like Star Trek, you know, when they bring a Shakespearean author, it classes up the show. And also they start having more more serious, more tragic concerns, and then it becomes more compelling. So I noticed the same thing with some of these movies and shows that come from the Marvel universe. One movie that struck me was Batman, which turned more into a tragedy when the Christopher Nolan trilogy came out, and because in the past it was more an action movie, you know, good guy, bad guy, but they started to make them a little darker, and now it seems like it's a trend that to make them darker, make these comic book based movies darker. But that's not just, obviously being dark doesn't make it Shakespearean. But I noticed a few tragic elements, and just a reminder, a refresher for everybody, what some of the tragic elements of tragedy are in Shakespeare. And Shakespeare changed a little bit some of the elements from classical tragedy, because, for example, I mean, we were talking about this idea of death as being the result of the conflicts in a tragedy. But in classical tragedies, they don't always die. For example, Oedipus in Oedipus Rex doesn't die as a punishment for his tragic fall. But in Shakespeare, they kind of tend to die, unless they're in
More
the
dramatic
history play where, you know, he had to stick to what happened in reality. So in any case, what this is one thing, the more dark characteristic of these movies, but Shakespeare's characters, tragic characters, they all have kind of a noble, obviously it's something known that the tragedies in Shakespeare's tragedies had aristocratic or noble or even kings, right? Royal characters. So they have to be of noble origin, while the comedies were lower class. So high class for tragedies, low class for comedies. So if we look, for example, at Batman, which was one of the first examples, and I have here the comparison side by side between Hamlet, one version of Hamlet, and Batman with Christian Bale as Batman. One thing about Bruce Wayne is that he's very rich, so there's a kind of the aristocratic, the high class element. Also the character, so it's noble origin, tragic flaw that leads to a tragic fall. So it's from the beginning, Batman has this one known flaw, which is his fear of bats, which is his trauma from childhood, right, when his parents died. So there's another connection between Batman and Hamlet, which is one thing that kind of struck me. Hamlet also has parents, his father obviously dies, and then the ghost of his father pushes him forward to take action against his foe. Batman has to overcome his flaw, and he never completely overcomes it, right? There's something dark about him. The trauma never leaves him, which makes him more edgy, or it gives him an edge as a comic book type character. Also, Hamlet is a character who conceals his intentions. So you can say that he wears a mask, and Batman and a lot of other heroes like that wear masks, so they conceal their identity, so they conceal their intentions in the real world. And of course, both of them are reluctant to take action. So with Hamlet, that's one thing about the play, is that the the ending of the play with everybody dying, almost everybody important dying, is a consequence of Hamlet putting off his taking action against Claudius. So the procrastination in Hamlet, the ambivalence, because he doesn't really want to be the tragic hero. He doesn't want to be a hero. He doesn't want to be a murderer. He doesn't want to kill anybody. He just wants to be, he's a lover, not a fighter. He wants to hang out with Ophelia and go to school and read philosophy. So Batman too, we see him as a reluctant hero. Every time, you know, something happens and he ends up saving everybody, then he retires. He wants to retire. And a lot of comic book heroes do that, right? They want to retire, but something happens and reluctantly they have to come back and start acting and helping everybody. So that's, of course, some parallels. One reason why I found that Batman trilogy so appealing was that it really created this dramatic tension. The flaws in the characters are more flaws, less perfect. If you think of, for example, Superman, the Christopher Reeve one, perfect, right? No flaws almost, except maybe when love comes up. But Batman is completely flawed as a character, right? Bruce Wayne is a jerk. And he has other flaws, including his trauma and his fear. So, of course, good and evil are played out in Shakespeare's tragic plays, sometimes in creating complexity. So good and evil are not so easy to tell apart. For example, character that, Hamlet is the one that, just as my example, Ophelia is warned about him, and because she's dating him, and it turns out that she dies because of his actions, and people warned her not to get involved. And for her, he becomes really evil or mean. He also kills her father. But anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of there's this parallel between the pattern of a tragic play in Shakespeare and the newer trends in movies based on comic books in Marvel universe. Another parallel I found between Batman and Hamlet, since that was my first example, the heroine, so Ophelia is from the Mel Gibson version of the movie, and this is Rachel in Batman. That's Maggie Gyllenhaal, who was the second impersonation, the second actress who played this character, because Katie Holmes didn't do that great a job. Anyway, so these is a lot of the women characters in the Marvel universe end up being either victims or having to abandon the hero because they're somehow damsels in distress that either get hurt by being associated with the hero, or they have to break up. So with Rachel, she actually dies. And just like Hamlet has to choose between love and duty. So he chooses, obviously, because he's a prince, and that's one of his tragic, the tragedy of Hamlet is that he can't escape his role as a prince. And that's what Ophelia is told from the beginning by her brother and her father. Don't get close to him because he's a prince, and he won't be able to choose you if the country requests his services. So that's what happens, and she dies because of this. Well, Rachel too, so this one of the girlfriends of Batman dies because of her involvement with him, and because he has to make a choice. And actually the Joker tricks him, and he goes and saves the wrong person, and Rachel dies. But in any case, he also has a duty toward the city, toward the good of all, as opposed to his love. So we see this in a lot of these movies, and for example, Spider-Man, in a lot of the versions, he has to stay away from his girlfriend, and one one movie sees her dying because she's with him, right? The
so
only
Andrew
successful
Garfield.
one is the latest version, right? Where it's a big reversal, and that's a less tragic version of Spider-Man, where the girlfriend is a strong girl, even stronger than Peter Parker, right? So
I
that's
think Toby,
kind of less of a tragic approach to that.
I think Tobey Maguire also ended up with Mary Jane, still being with Mary Jane at the end of the third
Okay,
film.
so he was, but the most striking one, the most tragic one is what's his name?
Andrew Garfield.
Yeah. That's the version where
Yeah,
she
with Gwen
dies.
Stacy.
It's the most
Yeah.
tragic one. Okay, so that's one parallel that I was making. Just to go a little quicker. I lost my, because I'm looking at my text at the same time. Okay, so the antagonist is also something that in Shakespeare's plays is very clear evil person, but many times it's a complex evil. So if you look at, for example, Iago, that everybody says is just pure evil without any justification. In fact, there is justification. He has, well, he's racist against Othello. He's upset that a person who's of an inferior race, according to him, becomes his superior because Othello is made a general. And also he has feelings toward Desdemona, or he kind of covets her, and the Moor takes the prettiest white woman. So that's kind of, there are some explanations to Iago's evil. There's envy, there's jealousy.
I have a question. So you're kind of rejecting this Harold Bloom claim that Iago is possessed of motiveless malignity, right?
Yes, just like with Hamlet. Well, I reject a few very known interpretations. For example,
that he's just evil. It's not a very good explanation. He's just evil because he's an evil.
Yeah, Shakespeare makes it very clear why he's upset with Othello. He has some very. I mean, he says, "This guy is made general. I should have been made general.
Yeah.
This guy's with this woman.
Sexual
in other circumstances,
promotion, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I would be with her. I, and he even thinks of maybe trying to seduce her, but then he tries to get somebody else to seduce her. And in fact, the way he attacks him is just to destroy his relationship. And with Hamlet, I reject the interpretation that Hamlet is mad, which a lot of critics say, oh, his madness. No, he's not mad. He's pretending. So it's a mask. It's
and he says that explicitly in the play.
Yeah. So if you read carefully, you don't have these dilemmas. I'm just making fun, but these are known interpretations, but they're kind of older.
Just to follow up, like, do you think that Bloom does this because the reasons why Iago destroys Othello's life seem so petty, right, and kind of small ball?
I don't know that they're petty. I mean, these are things that we see all around us: racism, envy, greed. These are very human traits, and they're not trivial at all. I mean, they play out in politics all the time and on the world stage. I mean, they're trivial if they're in your family or, in your relationship or something. But, on the world stage, that's what usually drives wars. So I have some pictures here of antagonists, and for Shakespeare, can everybody see? Sorry.
Yep, we can see it.
I went too far on my screen on the laptop. Okay, so some of the traits of the antagonists in Shakespeare: greed, destructiveness, envy. Sometimes they're pushed forward by supernatural entities. I have here, sorry, I always have to keep re-entering my password. So I also added the witches in Macbeth over here. And also on the other side, I have the plot against Julius Caesar. So there's political interest, political evil. There's even supernatural evil. But I had Othello with Iago on one side, upper left, and Claudius from Hamlet, who is the person who killed Hamlet's father, on the top too. So these are the forces, that the motivations that usually we see in Shakespeare's tragedies for the evil characters. In Marvel Universe, I have some characters with some similar traits and motivations. So we have, for example, the Green Goblin, who, well, of course, his father is killed, right? There's some, I mean, I have here Loki, of course, has envy. And Loki is a more complex character. We know that he turns kind of on the side of good, but for a long time he's a plotter and schemer. He's a trickster god, and he has a lot of envy toward his brother Thor. So there's a lot of Claudius in him, except again just as David said, in the Marvel universe, things that are tragic can reverse because there's a sequel, and then you see more kind of flips and reversals of trends and characters, and even the dead ones come back, including Loki.
I like the fact that the female variant is the most heroic version of Loki, right? That's an interesting choice.
Yeah. And I also have here, well, of course, Thanos, which is a little, to me, reminiscent of Claudius in some ways, because he wants power, and because he thinks his, as old dictator type or evil authoritarian people think, that their version of leadership is the best, but they will destroy anybody in the process of bringing, of having power and exerting it, expressing it. And the other one is Venom, that I have on the bottom here, which kind of to me looks a little like Iago whispering in Hamlet in Othello's ear. I had those
occasionally to eat people.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
So anyway, Venom is a little bit of an evil force, but in the Marvel universe, it can turn good too. But there was a previous version with Topher Grace that was just pure evil version of Venom. The newer one is a little more comic, so it's less evil. Okay. Women characters in Shakespeare, and this is something that has been debated a lot. I mean, was Shakespeare a misogynist or was he a feminist? Because you can see it both ways. A lot of people say his female characters are either very weak, like Ophelia, and Desdemona, who just crumble and die and are destroyed by their association with the hero. So they're damsels in distress who basically perish because it's a tragedy. And other women are, so if they're not weak, they're strong but evil, like Lady Macbeth. And I had... Okay, so, well, first I'll start with the weak ones. Here I have Desdemona with Othello, and then that's Mary Jane.
Stacy.
It's
Gwen Stacy from...
Yeah. Sorry, it's not Mary Jane. That was the
Yeah, Gwen Stacy is his girlfriend in high school that he...
Yes.
I'm was trying to save her. Yeah.
And that's the one who dies.
Yeah.
So by association with the hero, they end up, because they're seen as weak characters, they die. And the evil ones, so if they're strong, like Lady Macbeth, they are...
and Hela.
This is Loki's daughter. What was her name?
It's Loki's daughter in the mythology. In the
Yeah.
Marvel movie, it's Hela's their
Yeah,
half
Hela.
sister,
Hela. So strong and
Odin's
evil,
daughter.
or weak and easy to destroy. But I argue that Shakespeare actually is very subversive of this traditional understanding of women. So there are a lot of feminist characters in Shakespeare. For example, Viola in Twelfth Night, but that's not a tragic hero. I mean, that's a comedy, not a tragedy. But we have even Emilia in Othello, who was Desdemona's maid. She has all kinds of speeches about how men are the reason why women kind of fall toward evil deeds and things like that, because the evils we do, we learn them from them. So anyway, there are some feminist characters in Shakespeare. Sorry, I have here a comparison. So more complex characters, both in Shakespeare and the Marvel universe, more stronger women. So this is Viola, a version of Viola, who has to be in a man's, who has to disguise herself as a man. I mean, she doesn't have to, she chooses to, strangely. So she's kind of plays that character in order to have more power in the play. And of course, Black Widow, as represented by Scarlett Johansson. So we have more complexity, both in Shakespeare and in the Marvel universe, than it seems at first sight. Like, they're not all either damsels in distress or evil plotters and schemers.
But I just have a question. So do you think that so Shakespeare tries to give women more authority, more of a moral voice in the play, but it's still within a very patriarchal sort of structure where
it is
all the story is really
society.
about men. And I guess I'm just asking, like, do you think that, you know, and obviously in a lot of ways there are many, you know, strong heroines in the Marvel comics, in the movies increasingly, but to me it's still, you know, very much a kind of a patriarchal universe, right? I mean, these Marvel superhero movies, the DC movies, they're mostly, I mean, there are a lot of female fans, but they still seem pitched.
But it's changing. I do think that it's people resist the change. They, you know, just like with Star Trek or with Star Wars, if the women characters become too strong, then what are you doing? You're supposed to put the man right, or why are you having Rey as a heroine in
sort of like virgin whore, the victim, or you know, hell on wheels, like Hela on wheels character, right?
So I mean, people resist seeing women as complex and strong, and in Shakespeare's time that was the case too. I mean, he still had to preserve the structure of that society, which was patriarchal. So for his strong characters like Viola, she actually took on a male persona just to see. I mean, there's no explanation why she did it. I mean, it was a comedy, so he likes to mess things up and then fix them. So creates a lot of confusion because she has a twin and she acts like her twin. And
but also Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth was doing this, right?
Queen Elizabeth
the Queen, the male persona. I mean, a lot of people thought that she was in fact a man.
There's the masculine authority of the state, right? And then there's the court of love, right, of the woman. And she managed to play both of those brilliantly, right? And exploit both sort of stereotypes of her time to her own advantage.
And today the struggle is not over. You know, it's still kind of a man's world, and of course comic books and the Marvel universe is a man's world, but it's changing. And you know, we have more and more strong women who are not either evil or damsels in distress. So it's becoming more complex too.
And we're going to get more and more of that in upcoming movies. We're going to have a female version of Thor played by Jane Foster, and Thor: Love and Thunder coming in July, there's possibility the new Black Panther will be Shuri, T'Challa's sister. Of course, we've got literally a
Yes,
strong
right.
female character coming up, She-Hulk, literally
I
strong.
didn't know that. I didn't.
Yeah,
And there's a lot. I'm
supposed to
sure
be
there's a
funny,
lot of
so-
resistance to that.
Yeah.
I can hear the voices protesting.
Yeah, we'll have at least 3 major heroes in the sequel to Captain Marvel, The Marvels, with of course Captain Marvel herself, Miss Marvel, which will be the female Muslim hero introduced later this year in the TV show, maybe at the end of June. Then we'll have Ironheart, who will be a kind of a female version of Iron Man, coming in Wakanda Forever, and eventually getting her own Disney Plus series. So we're getting, there are stronger and stronger female characters coming in, but Marvel took the time to actually introduce them more, more carefully than just saying, "Oh, here they are."
Maybe the movies can do something and the shows can do something that the comic books in some respects have succeeded at doing, but also failed at doing. Like, there are a lot of great female characters in the comic books, but the problem, of course, for anybody that bothers to look at any comic book from the last 40 years is the hypersexualization of all of the female characters most of the time, not all the time. There are some great artists out there that are more balanced, but
because the primary audience of the comic books originally was males, and that's still an issue.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm just thinking maybe the movies and the television shows can do a better job of humanizing and presenting a female character in a plausible and believable way that you could identify with, right?
Well, and your audience base for the Marvel Studios material is much greater than just the comic book readers now. So even if you have those that complain about it, you still got the biggest audience ever created in terms of entertainment for Marvel Studios. Going back to what you were talking about, the tragic flaw with Hamlet failing to take action, you see that popping up in the Marvel universe, although it takes more of the form of, like in Tony Stark in the aftermath of the first Avengers, where he almost died, wanting to set something up that could take preemptive action, more aggressive action that would allow them to retire safely. Rather than having to respond to everything, that they could get ahead of it. And of course, that leads to the creation of Ultron, which of course is an absolute and complete disaster. And of course, Tony Stark has kind of that tragic flaw that we see in Shakespeare too, of the authority figure, the hero who knows better, who doesn't consult with others before making decisions.
Pride in a Shakespeare and in classical tragedies, pride is one of the biggest tragic flaws of characters that they
hubris.
Hubris, pride.
Like King Lear deciding to divide his kingdom among his 3 daughters, although the daughter in King Lear, Cordelia, could be considered a strong female character. She basically commands the armies of France coming over. Of course, she ends up dead, but that still, she is portrayed as one of a positive, strong female character. And of course, with Tony's decision, he doesn't consult with the others about his idea, and of course that leads in part to what ultimately splits up the first team of Avengers. The arrogance of pride going before a fall and not learning from your mistakes, or letting emotion get carried away with you. Going back again to Tony Stark at the end of Captain America: Civil War, when Zemo, who in some ways could mirror Iago in the sense that he, or some of the other Shakespearean villains who, use fake information or information to motivate the heroes that lead them down a disastrous path. So when he shows, Zemo shows Tony, the footage of the Winter Soldier killing his parents, even though there's an explanation of why Bucky Barnes behaved that way, Tony Stark doesn't want to hear it. Iron Man doesn't want to hear it. He just wants to kill, the Winter Soldier for what he had done in the past. And no amount of rationality or reasoning can stop him until Captain America basically has to incapacitate him. And so you have this of course, the fissure between the two former friends and allies could, echo the Macbeth, where Macbeth is separated to the point of, the only way to resolve it is through combat to the death between somebody who used to be his ally, with Macduff. In terms of villains, like, that are motivated, and we can understand their motivations. In King Lear, of course, we have Edmund, who's the bastard son of Gloucester. And you can almost feel sympathy for Edmund, at least in some portrayals. Like I just watched the Amazon Prime portrayal with Anthony Hopkins playing King Lear, and Florence Pugh, who's the new Black Widow, playing Cordelia. Gloucester in that version openly just talks about Edmund being a bastard and
that's in the play.
Humiliates him in open public.
Yeah.
And so you can almost feel sympathy for this. I mean, if this happens this one time, how many times has it happened before?
Yeah.
And so you could see the motivation that Edmund might have for going and doing these bad things, although he does express regret at the end, just as he dies.
Yeah.
The
They
one
all
villain
do, don't they?
the one villain that really
dying.
stands out to me as matching kind of Edmund would be Killmonger from the Black Panther.
Sure.
With the idea that, in some ways, Killmonger is kind of a bastard child left out of Wakanda, sent out into exile. And so you can understand almost what Killmonger is doing, why he's doing it, and even feel sympathetic for him at the end of the film and his motivation. For Thanos, of course, I kind of think of Thanos as the Richard III of the Marvel, of the MCU. Richard III is like Shakespeare's maybe one complete black heart villain that has no redeeming characteristics, who just completely wants power and doesn't care who he has to kill or how he has to do it. And even though he dies in battle at the end, I mean, this is not like the redemption that, Macbeth gets a little bit, that he dies fighting, even though it's against overwhelming odds. King Richard III's just a complete and total black heart, nothing.
They say Shakespeare did a hatchet job on Richard III, that he really wasn't that bad. There's a lot of new historical research on it, right? They're trying to justify Richard III.
Well, on the other hand, considering you're writing for the granddaughter of the king that overthrew Richard III, you probably better make sure you portray Richard III as much a bad guy as possible, because Elizabeth's grandfather Henry VII was the one. Henry Tudor was the one that overthrew him. So kind of have to make political decisions there. Of course, you had to kiss up to the nobility, because quite often in Shakespeare's time, they were the ones that provided the money to make the movies.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, maybe some things haven't changed. You have to have big finances to be able to make these type of movies. And of course, another interesting aspect with Thanos is that idea that he truly believes that he's right. he doesn't.
I never
see
really
himself
understand the
as
motivation,
evil.
though. Do you guys buy the motivation? Like, why would you need to wipe out half the universe just to
Because he
make
just
it a
has
more
this,
equitable universe? I mean, aren't there a gajillion other planets?
Well,
You
I always
could
said,
just
he
snap
wanted to
more
reduce the world.
planets into.
He
Yeah.
wanted to reduce the world population because we became all
Galactic
overpopulated, but he could have
population.
made a bigger Earth if he had
I don't.
absolute
I
power.
never understood it. I don't even understand it in the. I love Thanos as a character. He's really cool. I love one of my first graphic novels was with Thanos. You know, and the one with the death of Captain Marvel. But I've never really bought any of these grandiose motivations for Thanos. But I like the character, and I like those movies, of course.
Yeah.
I have two more slides. Can I go over them and then we can return to?
Okay.
Okay, so I have just two more things to, like, two aspects that I analyzed. One is comic elements, because there are a lot of those. I mean, obviously Shakespeare wrote comedies, and in comedies, you know, there's convoluted plot that in the end everything is clarified, and a lot of the time it ends in marriage. Everybody survives, or most people, I guess, unless you're really evil. And
those that you thought were dead come back. I mean, in that sense.
Yeah. So I mean,
quite literally a comedy of errors.
Yeah.
So Marvel does that a lot, right? And of course, things that seem impossible to solve get solved, and everybody's happy at the end. Not, as I said, there's more of a trend today to lean more toward the tragic aspects. But a couple things that I noticed, it's like similarities. They're comic relief characters, and in more recent Marvel movies, I mean, if you think of Spider-Man, and if you think of Iron Man, if you think of a lot of different ones, they have a lot of comic relief characters or jokes made during the movie. So it just, here I have my slide, my pictures. The top one is the Gravedigger in Hamlet.
Good Gravedigger choice.
Yeah.
Big.
That was my favorite.
Yeah, it's Billy Crystal playing the Gravedigger, and of course we have Deadpool, but
it's like a cosmic jester, right? Like
yeah. So we have a lot of.
Can't really die.
I mean, Deadpool is the main character, but we have a lot of comic relief characters. Also, another thing in common is the sidekick, and of course in Hamlet, the sidekick Horatio, who's Hamlet's best friend, is not really comic, but it does alleviate some of the tragic elements. And of course, this is the newer Spider-Man sidekick. Sorry, I'm kind of messing up here. And it's very common, right, to have the comic relief and the sidekick. And the third element that I put here in my slides is the disguise, using disguises. And Shakespeare loved that, right? Especially women pretending to be men. And one reason for Shakespeare was that women were not allowed to act. And so he had a lot of men that played women characters, and it was easy for them to switch to a male character, just, you know, because they were actually men. But, you know, today it's different. We have women playing that, and we have here Gwyneth Paltrow playing Viola. And below I have Clark Kent, one of the more notorious disguises, right? Except the very flimsy disguise that you just put glasses on and
the glasses
turn into Clark Kent. This is one of the most puzzling suspend your disbelief type of disguises. But
I guess it worked for audiences in the 30s. Like, wow, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And of course, the last element, I'm just trying to go quickly so that we can talk more. The last element that is a similarity is the romance. And so I have here the tragic version of that. So we have Romeo and Juliet, and I have the Wolverine romance with Phoenix. So these are doomed lovers, right? These and we have both in Marvel universe and in Shakespeare, a lot of examples of doomed lovers. But in comedies, the romance is successful. So I have here Viola with Orsino. In the end of the play, they end up together. And of course, this is the latest Spider-Man with
Mhm.
his girlfriend. They're of course dating in real life, which makes it cuter. But uh, right.
Of
So
course, until the wheels fall off and
yeah, I mean,
No
so
Way
far
Home.
it's yeah. But so I have a little conclusion, which is basically that, and I put here Deadpool with the Yorick skull. Shakespeare is never outdated, and he will never be outdated.
Yeah.
And because in his day he was the popular writer, and his plays were our movies. So just as you were saying, David, and so he offered to his audience a complex world of adventure, love, good and evil, fall from greatness, redemption, and romance, and that's what we still look for today. So that's my
Yeah.
Which, how funny, yesterday I saw that there's going to be a comic book series this summer, William Shakespeare's The Avengers from Marvel Comics, on the print end of things.
Oh, really?
So literally, what timing.
wow.
That's pretty cool. Well, the
Yeah.
Northman, which is opening today, uses one of Shakespeare's source texts, right?
Oh, wow.
About a Viking, right, who sought revenge for the death of his father. Yeah. Shakespeare's
Hamlet.
still alive. Yeah, Shakespeare doesn't seem to die, right?
Well, it's the timeless themes that Shakespeare used. It was just he
Yeah.
told the tales in a way that was more memorable than most other writers. The
Yeah.
themes that Shakespeare had go way back in time and have been told and retold many times. Shakespeare just did it in a way that was, extremely powerful and memorable.
Yeah.
And he had a command of the language that is still awe-inspiring, although, written for an audience in the Middle Ages, doing that in the 21st century, sometimes there's kind of a disconnect between contemporary audiences and Shakespeare with, trying to understand
because of
the
the
language.
right? But the
Yeah.
themes are still so
The themes are universal.
popular, and
Yeah.
the stories are. Well, Shakespeare was a plagiarist. The stories were not.
No.
Some of them were not his per
Yeah.
se. Some of them he made. He created
Yeah.
from scratch. But Hamlet, even King Lear, other plays are inspired either by folk tales or by actual plays that were written before. But just like with the Marvel universe, right? When you see a good director, the story becomes better, right? So
Mhm.
with Shakespeare, a story that was kind of old news at that time became the
Much
best
stronger.
version with him of the same story.
And I was also just going to add, one of the great qualities that Shakespeare has for me is, right, when we think about the artistic tradition at that time, right, the mystery and morality plays that were out there, they were mostly religious parables, right, religious messages. Shakespeare was one of the first authors, along with Marlowe, to really maybe start getting into some of the complexities of, right, our moral imaginations, right, and our problems, right, and the conflicted feelings that we have. And I think that psychological interiority is what kind of pulls me back to Shakespeare, like our discussion of Edmund earlier. Edmund has good reasons to be pissed off, right? Edmund has good reasons to question the entire system because the system screwed him over, right? From the beginning up until the moment when, he's hoping his father will actually recognize and pay attention to him. And I think that questioning of the system is something that's really powerful that Shakespeare did. I don't know that these do you think these Marvel movies have a message like that ever, that they actually seriously question the kind of nature of our society? Shakespeare does. Edmund.
I think so.
Well,
what do you guys think would be an example of that kind of sort of systemic questioning?
Well, okay, maybe on it can be on a micro scale, but also a larger scale. For example, the event of Black Panther caused T'Challa at the end of the movie to really question about the way that Wakanda has operated in the past, and realize that there was something to what Killmonger had said about just isolating themselves from the rest of the world and their system, because T'Challa gets beaten in combat, and then you get a guy as king who is just about to start World War III. And so you wonder, it's like, maybe you guys should do something about the way you select your leaders. This
We
is
need
kind of
a hero
yeah.
today.
Uh,
Where's Superman?
But
Yeah.
but
Yeah, where's
something
Superman
like
right now?
at the end of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, there's a lot of that as they get into racial issues and
They
Yeah.
try.
Falcon struggling with
They are.
becoming whether he wants to be Captain America, the introduction of the African American Captain America who had served in Korea, which was an adaptation of a 90s comic book limited series
Yeah.
called Red, Right, and Truth, which
What's
was
that character?
really,
That character's name is Isaiah Thomas.
yeah, Isaiah, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and having
Well,
showing
one
his
example that
bitterness.
came to mind. Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Yeah.
I'll let you.
And I also in the final episode where Falcon, who has then become Captain America, goes into a nice, very well written speech about the issues of race and inequalities within the Marvel universe and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and in the way society has been structured after the people returned from what they called the blip. And I thought that was nicely, questioning major issues. Also, the very idea of, what goes on in Captain America Civil War and Avengers 2 is like, what are the responsibilities of those that have a lot of power? Do you do more to protect things or do you wait to respond? Do you disobey what a government tells you to do? Like, with those that choose to side with Captain America and rejecting the Sokovia Accords, even though there's good reason for that, but they fear, being overtly controlled by the government.
Right.
The idea that somebody who has an extremist ideology, can cause such an immense destruction like Thanos, that's a significant issue.
Well, and there's also real life Black
terror.
Panthers. I was gonna say that we can't escape the parallel between the Black Panthers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And,
which the comic book was inspired by. Right?
Yeah, and as we're going forward, of course, Miss Marvel, I'm pretty sure we will have some discussion of issues of the relationships in the religions, because it's going to be the first straight out Muslim female superhero. So it may tackle both, religious issues and issues of, the role of Muslim women in Islamic society. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how much that gets addressed.
Yeah.
And these
how is
movies
Thor
are
going
way
to
to
react?
normalize. These movies normalize what is seen as other or as different. The
Yeah.
movies help
Yeah.
to normalize it and bring it to the public. It's okay to have, different people among
And-
us, and
And
sometimes
one of the things that I really
they
like
save us.
about Marvel films, as well as Shakespeare, is that they acknowledge the complexity of these issues, that the solutions are not simple. For part of the reason that Hamlet hesitates for so long is that the idea back then that the king was God's chosen representative, and you did not go and murder the king without really, really, really good justification, lest your own soul be damned. And so Hamlet's like, should I do something, because that involves the murder of the king, and I have to make sure that it's not a spirit that is deceiving me, that is trying to fool me. Like
Hamlet
we see
is very
that with
wise.
Wanda. Yeah, Wanda and Quicksilver in the second Avengers film, Age of Ultron, where they've been brainwashed by Hydra to believe certain things, and fortunately, they're able to set that aside and change their minds. But then there are those like Ultron or Thanos, who no amount of rationality can get them to change their mind or see things a different way. you know,
There's no
and there's no
diplomacy with Thanos.
yeah, or Ultron. You know, they're set in their ways, and you know, there's acknowledgement of the complexity of these issues in the MCU that a lot of other movies simply avoid, or just kind of pay lip service to it, or just kind of make it to a very simplistic model. You know, one group bad, another group good.
My example that came to mind when Robin asked that question is the most serious discussion that I've seen in a movie based on comic book characters of mental illness is the Joker movie.
Yeah.
And it's so different from anything else. I mean, it's not even, it doesn't involve anything superpowers or anything. It's just a discussion of mental illness, which needs to be brought up. And I think they did a really good job, and Joaquin Phoenix did so amazingly.
I haven't watched the series yet, but Moon Knight addresses those issues of mental illness, because you know the character of Moon Knight is you know, a lot of his backstory involves multiple there you go, multiple personalities. To a degree, we had that in Spider-Man No Way Home, where they talked about some of the mental illness of, you know, like the Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus. You know, the idea that and what was impressive, of course, with No Way Home was that even though the characters did not necessarily have a huge amount of screen time, they still were able to talk about the mental illness, you know, inherent in at least two of the major villains that
I thought that was beautiful. Yeah, I mean, like, you know, like it was the only superhero movie I've seen where the hero's compassion for the villains changes the outcome, right? And I thought that was a wonderful way of trying to think about it. If the heroes really, all of these movies depicting the heroes killing, you know, breaking the bones of, disfiguring the villain, you know, for once, right, like it was a movie that I thought was truer to Spider-Man's character, of somebody who really wants to do good even by people who are confused or who are wrong. And
that became my favorite Spider-Man movie.
Yeah. Although even that, I liked how when, you know, we had the great tragedy that takes place in Spider-Man No Way Home, that kind of reminded me of that King Lear moment where you think you know, King Lear and Cordelia are going to be okay, and then suddenly, bam, Cordelia's dead. You know, when Aunt May, you know, ends up dying in No Way Home, that was just like, oh my God, that's whoa. And yeah, that was immensely powerful emotion, and the way Tom Holland's Peter Parker reacted, where if Tobey Maguire hadn't stepped in, the older, more mature Spider-Man, or the oldest, most mature Spider-Man, Tom Holland's Peter would easily have killed him. And that's understandable, because, you know, he just, you know, the Green Goblin just killed his aunt, his mom. And, you know, either the anger at that is also rolled into his own guilt for that, because, you know, his exposing his identity to Mysterio in the second one created a link of causalities that led, of course, to his aunt's death. That if he never would have exposed his identity to Mysterio, it wouldn't happen. But he, you know, and he finds out that, you know, and another thing I liked about No Way Home is that, you know, he tries to kind of use magic and sorcery as a get out of jail free card. You know, that you create a magic spell and bam, everybody forgets that the Mysterio ever exposed your identity. Except there's a price to that. You know, it's not, there's limitations to magic. In other words, you can cast the spell, but you can't make exceptions to it. You can't say, okay, well, I want Mary Jane to remember and Ned to remember and these people to remember. The spell doesn't work like that. And so when he makes that mistake, of course, there's the immense consequences to it. But that also allows him that very heroic moment where he's able to choose to essentially kill his own life. Essentially, everybody forgets I'm Peter Parker. So it's as if I never existed. All my history is killed, which is truly, something, absolutely heroic, that he's able to sacrifice all of that to for others, even at the expense of his own happiness. It also shows that he's learned from the mistakes that he has made previously. And yeah, I love the touch of Doctor Strange saying that I don't want to forget you. That he's reluctant to cast the spell because he actually admires the Peter being able to make that sacrifice and give up that life. And wonder if, and Doctor Strange 2 will kind of explore, does Doctor Strange have any kind of leftover emotions from basically knowing that in order to stop Thanos, Tony Stark had to die, and he had to do things in a way that would lead to Tony Stark's death. Now, I haven't explored that yet, but it'll be curious to see if they pick up on that in the second in 2 weeks, basically.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It looks cool.
And I think one of the things that I think really matches well with Shakespeare and the MCU is this ability to balance comedy and tragedy. Although probably the MCU in its more serious movies uses comedy more often than Shakespeare would.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, I mean, like one problem, for the tragedies in Shakespeare to work, of course, the moral consequences of the character's actions have to play out. And one problem, in my opinion, with comic books or with superhero movies as a genre in general is that you start to feel like there's no consequence because the heroes always come back, right? They die and they're resurrected.
Yeah.
The tragedy is usually offset by sort of comic notion of the world being restored to order at the end, right? Yeah. And what do you two think about that? I mean, like in that sense, I don't really feel like comic books are usually in a tragic mode. I think that even
Not
though
usually,
they have tragic
but
elements, but yeah,
as I was saying from the beginning, I think they probably realized that adding the tragic element makes it more complex, and they are not afraid anymore to kill like Tony Stark, or let some dead characters be dead.
Yeah.
But maybe create alternate universes where they're not dead, but still the dead one is dead in this universe, or it creates
the variants are really helping here right now. You can kill Wolverine in one place and then it'll pop up somewhere else.
But this one is dead, so I mean, there's still the kind of underlying tragic element that maybe they're more able to leave it tragic with the multiverse idea.
Yeah. Well, and we do have the consequences kind of dealt with in individual movies, but also on a larger scale, although it's in a more drawn out deal. Like going back to the first Iron Man at the end of the movie when Tony Stark announces, "I'm Iron Man." And in the second one, that gets picked up where Tony's business and loved ones come under attack because of that choice he made. The fact that Tony Stark almost died carries over into both Iron Man 3 with the psychological impact, but also Avengers Age of Ultron, as his decisions in that movie that lead to the creation of Ultron are very much motivated by the fears that he experienced at the end of the first Avengers at having almost died. Also, his reluctance in Infinity War to get involved again, or in Endgame to get involved again, that, I finally have the kind of life I've wanted, but if I come back, I might lose everything. The notion that the entire world is struggling, and even though they call it the blip, everyone is still struggling with that kind of event. I mean, they try to rationalize and trivialize it by calling it the blip, but I always thought that was the perfect name for it, because how else do you deal with something on a scale like that? Even
well, like
though
COVID today, the pandemic is a blip. I mean, hopefully it will remain, will be remembered as a blip, but actually took a lot of lives that never came back.
Yeah, and it changed a lot of things. And so even though, people might say, oh, it's a blip, everybody's back now. 5 years of time have still passed. People have moved on. Everything is still different. And there's still the knowledge that there's entities in the universe that have that kind of power. And there's nothing that a lot of people could do about that. That's pretty terrifying.
And that's very human to realize that you can't plan it for everything. So there will always be something that doesn't go according to plan, and that could completely turn everything upside down. And you have to be ready to deal with that too, if it happens.
Yeah, so even though there is in a way like, kind of a escape from the full tragic consequences, they still linger on in the characters. And what the survivors think and what they believe and the choices that they make. And that's, of course, what helps to have the continuing story.
Yeah, I like the fact that in Winter Soldier, Captain America, like Superman, kind of a static character. It's sort of like a one-note character a lot of the time. Like I don't know about you, David, but like I didn't really enjoy those comic books most of the sometimes they were good, but most of the time they were kind of boring, Iron Man is the bad boy, right? Kind of like the version, some versions of Batman. He's an alcoholic, he's a womanizer. He's got all of these issues, but he eventually becomes a better person. And I thought that they made a smart decision in Winter Soldier to have Captain America actually be against the government, right? Kind of be a revolutionary in that moment, because it's been corrupted. Of course, it's playing on a lot of people's fears about that, which have only gotten worse in recent years. But I thought that's one of the better uses of a character that in some respects is not all that intriguing, right? Captain America doesn't have a whole lot of growth, right? He's a hero, right? Resurrected like King Arthur, brought back from Avalon, and
or he tries to focus on other things that, other than, like, for example, the fact that he's a man out of time.
That
they,
that's his personal tragedy.
And also the choices that he makes. Now, he's better at disguising it than a lot of the others are in that sense. And he's able to kind of snap back into that command role and command character that he has. But, I kind of like where he makes that acts like he's just going to return all the gems, and then he doesn't come back, and next time we see him as an old man, that he's made a decision, but he didn't tell anybody else. So like he does internal struggles with that. And like in Endgame, like each of the Avengers kind of has their own stage of grief that they're expressing. And of course, I like that Captain America, Steve Rogers is now like essentially a therapist discussing the, group therapy with a bunch of different guys, and they're all sitting there talking about it. That kind of reflects that he kind of handles it internally. And as he's giving therapy, he's doing therapy for himself. Thor gives himself up to despair, becomes chubby Thor.
Oh no. I
Uh,
identify too
yeah.
much with Fat Thor. Oh no.
Yeah, Hulk throws himself into kind of making himself better, becoming a Professor Hulk.
Yeah.
Black Widow becomes
Professor
a
Hulk is
control
awesome.
freak. Yeah,
Yeah.
control freak, not necessarily in a bad way, but borderline irrationality. It's like
Right.
there was an earthquake, so what can we do about it? Nothing. It's earthquake. Or she needs to be reminded that there's problems all over the cosmos, not
Mhm.
just on Earth. Hawkeye, of course, becomes a symbol of anger and wrath, going on a 5-year killing spree.
Yeah.
So, it was nice that they showed the effect on the various characters, and almost kind of like they represented different stages of grief.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that, but I
Yeah.
like that. But one other thing I would just say about like if we think about DC and Marvel, like the two greatest DC heroes, Superman and Batman, come out of the 30s. But the
Yeah.
heroes that most of the world has fallen in love with recently are these Marvel heroes who were born out of the 60s and a lot of social conflict, strife. The idea that the hero is imperfect. And that's a way to try to get into the character, right? In the sort of very classical sense, right? They have to have a flaw, right, to make you be able to see them as being just like you. I think that's something the Marvel characters in general do well in the comic books and in the movies. You feel something for their struggle. They're all wrestling with their own problems, trying to juggle, right, work-life balance, right, like their duty, right, and their ability to love and deal with the trauma of their lives. And I think these movies have done a much better job in recent years of dealing with like the idea of trauma, right? Like you were saying, I mean, like Iron Man is traumatized, right, and that's why he wants more surveillance. That's why he wants control over people with superpowers in the comic book. And it's not an unreasonable position to take that up. You say these people are dangerous, somebody has to monitor them. It's a reasonable question.
And we see that, for example, in Loki with the Time Variance Authority and the introduction of Kang, of the individual who will become Kang the Conqueror, wiping out any variant timelines. So you have the sacred timeline, the ancient one. We have this timeline that we have to keep control of it. In Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, we'll be introducing the Illuminati, who in the comic books are the most powerful set of heroes, mostly men in the comics, who are basically meet and make these huge universe-altering decisions.
It happens like every month. They just convene every month, and there's the universe.
It's like you have Professor X, Black Panther, Black Bolt from the Inhumans, Submariner, Captain America, Iron Man. Funny how they don't have any females on there.
Where's the representation?
But we'll see their introduction in the Multiverse of Madness, and if the rumors are correct, we're going to have Tom Cruise appearing as Iron Man Supreme, or the Superior Iron Man, who's going to be like, what if Iron Man had kind of followed through on his plans, in the Age of Ultron, but he had actually set it up.
I wonder if they'll introduce Reed Richards, right? Who, really becomes a terrifying villain like Kang in the comic books, right? The Council of Reeds is what inspired, the Rick and Morty guy to create like, the Council of Ricks.
Well, we're definitely going to get, the Fantastic Four very, very soon. Whether they'll be introduced in, Doctor Strange 2, or we'll wait for maybe Ant-Man Quantumania. And of course, one of the things that the MCU has done that Shakespeare did, beyond his history plays, is to provide this interconnectedness between all the different movies. Where the stuff that happens in one affects the other. That was not, you didn't have Hamlet making reference to Romeo and Juliet or to King Lear. you didn't have that interconnectedness. Another one, of course, is that all of Shakespeare's plays were written and, of course, directed by Shakespeare, whereas in Marvel, you can have a wide variety of different directors and different voices taking place and different writers. Now, of course, that's inherently different in the genres. It's easier to do that now with modern movies than it was, say, in the time when Shakespeare was performing and writing his plays. I mean, it's a different nature. It's a different construct. Not to mention, it's kind of difficult to imagine Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare sharing the same room, agreeing to work together without them maybe killing each other, given the and of course there was competition back then. But in with the way the MCU has it set up, it kind of works better where there's any director can choose to stay there and work more, or they can go out and do other jobs with the benefit of having worked for Marvel and having elevated their career. Also taking creative risk. That's another thing that Shakespeare would do. It can't have been easy to keep on producing tragedies where you had everybody die at the end. It's like, how do you keep people coming back if you're going to have a stage full of dead bodies? But the quality of the story, the humanness of the characters, the ability to see us within these characters, and Macbeth makes a horrible mistake and is guided away by ambition, but can't that happen in a lot of people's lives? Maybe not on the scale of becoming king, but becoming overly ambitious, giving into temptation, trying to take shortcuts to power, or making a decision that you later regret and wish you could go back and change. Of course, Marvel has the ability to explore that fantasy element of changing something. Or maybe it's proven that, even though if you can change it, it still has consequences to it, like with of course, the snap and the blip and everything. But, the characters have a humanity to them and are relatable and fun and have complexity to them. And even though people tend to talk most about the tragedies of William Shakespeare, his comedies deserve attention too. I like how Marvel has tried to make the comedies like the Guardians of the Galaxies films, for example, which are more comic in nature, or Thor Ragnarok, the Ant-Man film, where they're more comic, funny in nature, but they still have a significant role to play in the MCU. That you, in order to get the full effect, you need to watch all of them together, or not necessarily, but it does help if you watch them all, and you will get something out of something like Ant-Man, because the full this upcoming one is going to be the full introduction of Kang the Conqueror. And then, of course, we might well get the first actual sight of what will become the MCU Fantastic Four in the upcoming one. And, I tend to think that maybe in 500 years from now, I can't help but thinking that the movies of the Marvel Cinematic Universe will maybe have a status that we now give to the plays of William Shakespeare.
Well, yeah, I would say, of course, the writing isn't there, right? And not to say that the Marvel movies aren't well written, and some of them really are great, but yeah, I don't think they're quite ready to, be put right on the shelf alongside King Lear. But I think the stories are pretty amazing sometimes. And as you were saying, it's such a malleable art form. You can do so many different kinds of stories with superhero characters. And I think that's what makes it, powerful and profound, and who's to say, right? As you're talking about, these characters are popular now. Maybe people will identify with those stories just as much as they identify with Hamlet, right? To the extent that people still do. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, of course, the way that they're written, of course, the ways that they're written are inherently different. Back in Shakespeare's day, it was expected that I would say that it was kind of expected that the characters would be kind of speaking poetically.
And also, they didn't have any special effects, so they had to. The language was the special effect. They had to describe things in greater detail. They had limited props.
They all had to give a big speech before they die.
Yeah,
and
explaining all of their psychological concerns and issues.
And that was kind of their long running tradition, even going back all the way to ancient Greek plays.
Yeah.
But I mean, of course, now if you had a Marvel movie that had like the Avengers talking in an iambic pentameter, people would be looking like, what? I mean, that would be kind of like, that's kind of odd. On the other hand, I can't imagine one movie doing that, Deadpool. I can imagine Deadpool doing a movie where he's going off chatting in an iambic pentameter the entire time. Of course, that's one of the liberties that Deadpool might be able to have because he's Deadpool.
Yeah. I was saying before, Deadpool's like the cosmic jester, right? Like, he gets to do everything. He breaks the fourth wall. Right? And of course, I want to see more with that. That's fun. I want to see a pure comic Marvel movie.
It'll be interesting to see. I don't know that we have had any equivalent like that, where in like King Lear, the jester is able to speak his mind freely with no fear of consequences. I don't know that we've had that in the MCU. Okay, maybe Rocket Raccoon maybe. Yeah. Max, although I think more Rocket Raccoon, giving a dressing down to Thor about his emotions and so forth in Endgame. But that significant role of the fool that in King Lear, where he's able to criticize Lear and tell him that he's being utterly and completely foolish, giving splitting his kingdom between the daughters, and Kent tries to do that and he ends up in James. But the fool can get away with it. Deadpool can kind of do that, get away with probably saying anything. Be interesting to see if She-Hulk does that too, because in the She-Hulk comic that's supposed to be the inspiration for the new series, She-Hulk breaks the fourth wall too. Although I don't know if they'll do that in the.
I think I heard they are going to try to take that approach, which sounds neat to me. Like I'm looking forward to it as more of a comic series, like that.
Yeah, it might explain why
the actress is amazing. Yeah,
it might explain why they're going to have to taking more time with that, because if you try to do that, you have to add more complexity to kind of the storytelling aspect of it. Yeah. And that's one of the things I like about the MCU too, even though some could argue that, my God, it's becoming overly complex. They're not backing off of continuing with this multiverse story, continuing to add complexity to the MCU, and I think the audience appreciates that. I mean, it's why I think the MCU holds on to its audience and even continues to grow its audience. Thor.
Moon Knight's interesting. Moon Knight is an interesting show to me. I don't know. You should watch it. I mean,
I'm going to.
The multiple personalities part, I think, is still kind of like a gimmick at this point. Just to try to get you into the story. But I'm looking forward to seeing what they do. With like the idea of mental illness but they're also playing that character for laughs in a way that I think is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then he'll be showing up, of course, in the future and more the natural end of the MCU, which will be quite fascinating as well, to be able to, continue to grow your audience. For example, when the Thor Love and Thunder teaser that dropped on Monday, that got more views than any previous Thor movie, and even was up there with Avengers Endgame. Well, if you haven't watched that yet, anyone, go and watch it. It's absolutely great. It looks hilarious.
And I like the storyline in the comic book, right? Where, because
Yeah.
there's a built-in tragedy to Jane Foster as Thor, right? Because when she wields the hammer, right, she's able to forestall dying of cancer, right? But she gives it up, right? And she goes right back to where she was. Now, of course, they fixed that, and now she's not dying anymore. But anyway.
And of course, the whole story behind Gore the God Butcher is, you're going to inherently have some tragedy there, because you've got another guy, and depending on what they do with Gore's origin story, Gore the God Butcher is another origin of a villain where one can understand his motivation and why he may have initially started, although much like Thanos and Ultron, they take it to an extreme level that one set of gods was bad, therefore all gods are bad, therefore all gods must die.
It's also got a very subtle name, the God Butcher, right? I wonder if he's a bad guy or not. I mean,
Yeah, I know, kind of obvious. When Ultron, humans have made horrible mistakes many times in their existence, but and so that means every human has to be wiped out. Rather than trying more rational environmental solutions, the only way to solve the overpopulation problem is to kill 50% of life in the universe. It's fair, because
I guess it's a one-stop solution.
People who die are chosen at random, therefore it's fair.
Yeah.
Kind of an extreme solution. That's like, oh my God, there's a mosquito in my house. Let me go get my hand grenade. And I'll throw a hand grenade into my house to kill the mosquito. It's kind of an extreme solution there.
Yeah. It never quite holds up. But Thanos, it's cool. I like Thanos.
Yeah, well, we had mentioned this in our previous one last semester, where at least the kind of the environmental terrorist motivation of Thanos is a lot easier to understand, that he's in love with a physical manifestation of death, Lady Death, which is like, what?
Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Although we are going to start to get that. I mean, with the introduction of the Celestials and the Eternals, and and I did like the Eternals too, for daring to take risks. And that Shakespeare did that too. He would produce plays that may not necessarily be the most his audience wouldn't necessarily love or didn't respond to well. And he probably did perform those again, but he didn't kind of hide them away either. And even though Eternals didn't get the kind of box office response that Marvel didn't hold up, they haven't said, oh, it never happened. These characters will never show up again. The director really screwed up. They didn't do what your typical Hollywood studio does. Oh, it's a flop, it's the director's fault. Marvel Studios had Chloe Zhao's back, and even though audiences didn't respond to the Eternals that they liked, it was worth taking the risk. And I actually thought the movie was quite good. It was very, very different, but I liked it. I like that difference in how they presented it, and it introduced a whole new set of things into the Marvel universe. The multiverse and everything. It's got a really good future.
Yeah. The worst part of the movie was Angelina Jolie's performance, which to me was like phoning it in the extreme. but other than
okay,
that.
yeah. Okay, yeah, I can. Yeah, of course, and that also comes from the dangers of introducing a large ensemble cast.
Sure.
Yeah, where you.
I like the deaf character, Makari.
You're gonna have, yeah. And some of the others, you know, where I hope that they do more with the actor who played like the large guy, for the Asian actor, who was like kind of trying to help Angelina Jolie keep control of her character.
The kind
He
of
was a lot of
the
fun.
Vulcan-like character, you know, it's like the
Yeah.
inventor. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, I had seen him in Train to Busan too, so I already liked the actor in the first place. So I hope he kind of hangs around the MCU.
Yeah.
Okay. With that being said, I think we're getting close to lunchtime, so I hope everybody's enjoyed the.
I guess we went a little
this
longer than I thought we
presentation.
would. That's nice. Well, anyway,
Yeah.
thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it.
Thank you everybody for sticking
Thank you,
around.
everybody.
I think it's a fun, you know, it's fun. This is a fun
for my
subject,
students.
right? Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
fun to
and
talk
there's
about.
endless things to talk about with the MCU
Yeah.
and how they're developing, and hopefully someday we'll be able to do some for the DC film. Certainly it'd be interesting to look at the cinematic history of Batman, especially with the new one, the Robert Pattinson version.
Have you seen that? I was just curious. Do you like
I
it?
just did.
Since you're our resident superhero guy.
Yeah, I waited to see it on HBO Max, but I watched it this week. It was really good.
Yeah. I'm looking
I
forward
was
to seeing it.
very impressed. I thought that the creators made really good choices in terms of making this new Batman distinct from the other incarnations, cinematic incarnations and TV incarnations, while having a couple of Easter eggs, paying tribute to previous characterizations.
And you know one thing, and I was just gonna add like one thing about these characters, you know, that when I fell in love with these stories as a kid, one thing that maybe, you know, you don't get as much from Shakespeare that you do get from a lot of these superhero stories is a sense of, you know, like hope, right? I identified with the struggles of these characters. You know, Peter Parker is struggling to make rent, right? My mom was going from job to job for a period before she managed to get something that she wanted. You know, we had privations. I love that quality. Like a lot of people are very hard on superhero stories as being childish and infantilizing. And, you know, that's just not the way I perceive it. You know, I think these stories as being of enormous value, especially, you know, to kids, maybe, except for the violence part, but even for adults, right? That idea of triumphing over impossible odds, I think we need that, right? I think we all need that sometimes. We need those characters.
I need to apologize that I used DC characters in my presentation because
oh no,
I'm not very good with making
now.
that distinction, and because I didn't read the comics, but
it's fine. It's
so
fine.
I already talked about Batman and, you know, a few others.
I think it's good to. I think Batman works
in my mind, you know, I wanted
to
talk about this comic book type characters and Shakespeare because I think both DC and Marvel are.
Yeah. And I think Batman's also shifted, you know, like back in the day, he was like this, you know, very, very focused detective. And now he's become kind of like this tortured soul. So he's gone through a transition. Less stable.
That's why, I mean, that's why he was the most like Hamlet to me. That's why I used him. But I kind of, I didn't pay that much attention to this distinction between Marvel and DC. Because I was excited to talk about Batman.
Well, in terms of creating the cinematic universe, if you didn't have Superman and Batman the movie, if you didn't have the Christopher Reeve films or the Michael Keaton films, I don't know that you would have had the MCU.
Yeah,
films.
I mean they were
right.
They inspired all the other ones to.
And I mean, there's a direct link between the MCU and Superman the movie that Kevin Feige learned his craft from Richard Donner.
That's right.
When they were producing the X-Men films.
Right.
And Richard Donner, of course, established the foundational tone of the comic book movie with Superman the movie.
Yeah,
and
it's a powerful atmosphere in the original Superman, right? Like like you'll believe that a man can fly. That was their tagline, and I think he came pretty close. You know, like I think there's something about, at least for me, but you know, I'm old enough to remember seeing it in the theater. For me, it was a powerful movie. Yeah.
the story is still timeless, though. Superman the movie and Superman 2 still hold up very well, even though the effects now are, look,
Yeah.
Like barbaric, the Stone Age compared to what they're doing, what's capable now in like Avengers Endgame or the Eternals or Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
But it's a story and the characterization, even though, and I liked how Christopher Reeve, dealt with kind of the ridiculousness of Clark Kent's disguise, where his mannerisms as Clark Kent is entirely different than Superman. I know that still doesn't buy it. I mean, come on. Lois Lane is one of the smartest reporters of all time, and she can't tell that.
That's right.
Superman's right in front of me.
English reporter Lois Lane can't figure it out, right? Yeah.
Well, Moon Knight does a good job. I mean, Oscar Isaac does a great job having completely different mannerisms.
Yeah.
As the two characters, as two sides of the character.
Although Moon Knight always has a full mask on. It's not like he's disguising himself to doesn't bother to disguise himself like say Thor. Of course, it would be hard for Thor to hide behind in a disguise. I mean, it's kind of, unless he look like Endgame, then you might know, like, is that Thor? No way.
Well,
but yeah, I mean, and certainly Batman has informed a number of the different Marvel heroes, and they're compared to him. Like, I think one of the mistakes is that some people say, "Oh, Moon Knight's just a knockoff of Batman." No, it's not.
Yeah.
No. I mean, one of the versions of the character of Moon Knight, okay, they're both rich individuals, et cetera, but they're very much different. Characters have been portrayed differently. I think the new Batman movie too does a good job getting into the psychology of the villain. It focuses much more on Batman being a detective than, say, the psychological aspect, which was really kind of the center of the Christopher Nolan trilogy.
I'm looking forward to seeing it.
And to a degree, Ben Affleck's portrayal in Batman versus Superman and Zack Snyder's Justice League, but that was never really allowed to come fully to fruition with the decisions Warner Media made about that. But hopefully we'll be able to do that kind of discussion on DC, within the next couple of years. Hopefully the new ownership will get us a DC film universe that can start to be built up like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because
I feel like it's gotten a little dark for the DC characters. I kind of like to see like what we've just been talking about. I think underscores one issue. I don't, like the comic elements in the Marvel movies are a lot more effective overall than in the DC films, which sometimes the colors are washed out, right? They're dark. Superman's killing people. Yeah.
Be more tragedy and Marvel more toward comedy. That's an interesting.
Yeah.
Comparison.
It's that gets into a long history too of the tone of the current DC movies that involves studio interference, bad decisions by executives. That's a saga in and of itself that could take up 2 or 3 hours to talk about.
Well, I guess we could wrap it up.
We'll come back to it. Don't worry.
Thanks for violating the.
We can talk about this for another 2 hours, no doubt. Because we like this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also nice that we as academics are talking about stuff that so many others in our field just kind of reject.
I think it's changing though, right? Like I think it's like it was changing when I was in graduate school, but I think it keeps changing all the time, And I'm still working on my PhD, so I was talking to my professor, and she was just pointing out, that people are a lot more open today than they were even 10 years ago about a lot of pop culture issues. Just like Mickey Mouse, or trying to study the symbology of corporate logos, or popular culture is important in our society, and we shouldn't just dismiss it as being something that everybody likes or it's a popular medium. You know, these are things that people like for a good reason, and we can talk about that, and it's worth
Yeah,
talking.
and as I've always pointed out, Shakespeare was popular culture in
Right.
his day.
Right.
That's
And he was not
exactly-
writing for professors, right? He was writing for
No.
the average person.
I mean, he was also writing for the Queen and Kings of England because
Oh,
they're the
sure.
ones that supported the
Sure.
performances, but
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, he had to be careful about that one. Yeah.
yeah, they were the studio heads of their era.
That's right.
Except in like in the case of Henry VIII, the studio head was far scarier because you pissed off the studio head in Henry VIII's time, off goes your head. The worst that can happen to you if you piss off the head of Disney is you get fired. Disney can't send you
now, but
yeah, Disney can't send you to get your
And
head
Disney
cut
just
off.
got in trouble. I guess we'll see how it goes. Right?
Yeah. Well, Ezra, with whatever happens to Ezra Miller as the Flash,
Oh yeah.
he at least doesn't have to worry about getting beheaded at the order of
Yes.
Warner Brothers, you know?
That's right. That's right.
Whereas at Henry VIII or Queen Elizabeth I, oh, William, I don't like what you said.
Off with his head. Well,
Yeah.
thanks again to everybody that came out. You know, I really appreciate it. Thanks for hearing us out and joining our conversation.
okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great weekend.
Have a
And for
wonderful
my
weekend,
classes,
guys. Bye.
Just let me know that you attended. Bye. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.